What's up guys, Asian here again with another Elsweyr PTS video, and today we're going to be taking a look at the damage loss or damage gain, basically DPS in general, that has happened with the Stamina Nightblade and Bobo builds in general, excluding Stamina Wardens, due to the changes that were made to Lethal Arrow, along with other sort of class changes that were made on the Elsweyr PTS patch 5.0.0. So this is taking consideration 5.0.0 by the time this video goes live. I believe 5.0.1 should be out, in which case there might be a couple of changes here. So this is really taking a look at 5.0.0. So if there are any changes that did take place in 5.0.1, this video does not reflect those changes. But right now, as of 5.0.0, they did a couple of things to kind of change the Stamina Nightblade toolkit. The first one is they took off Minor Berserk from our relentless focus, so that's a little bit of a DPS loss right there. The other thing that they also did was they changed the cast time to Lethal Arrow from 1.1 seconds down to a even 1 second, and they also nerfed the damage by 25%. So pretty significant nerf to the damage. We do gain a little bit of additional cast time, or I should say global cooldown from the reduction in the cast time, but the question is of course whether that 25% reduction is worth it or not. The other thing that they also changed that was not included in the PTS patch notes was they cut the damage of the spider synergy from Spider Silk in half. So quite a few changes here that have happened over on the bow side of things. They also changed arrow spray as well, so that way the arrow spray dot now doesn't really last quite as long. It lasts for 4 seconds. It still does approximately the same amount of damage, but if we are going to end up using arrow spray like I am in my Wrathstone bow video, we will end up losing some sustain because we will be casting acid spray every 4 seconds rather than I believe it's every 7 or 8 seconds on the Wrathstone video. So in order to kind of make up for that, I decided to just completely drop acid spray because it's not really worth the additional damage since we're would be casting it a little bit more often, and instead I decided to place it with Killer's Blade, one for the additional crit chance from the assassination skill passives, but also just because if there are instances where you can get within melee range, you might as well try to do so you can get some killer blades in there as well. So pretty much everything else, I did make a couple of changes to the build itself just because I did get some pieces of advice from other endgame players who do Bobo builds in Cloud Rest and Asylum. So the first thing that I changed was I'm using a precise bow instead of double poisons. That's also because of the revelation that bug from poisons, reducing the weapon damage enchant on our back bar, was brought to light after I had made the Wrathstone video. So I decided to go with, I asked around a little bit, asked whether sharpened or precise or infused was going to be stronger, and the general consensus is that precise is going to be the best option for your front bar bow. On the Wrathstone video, I did use Sharpen, so I did have to adjust my CPs in order to kind of make up for that loss in penetration there. But beyond that, it's still the same. It's still Tsagvins and Reliquins here. I actually have to transmute the Tsagvins jewelry into Bloodthirsty, so while I'm doing that, I can kind of discuss kind of what's going on with Bobo builds in Wrathstone and looking forward into Elsweyr. So right now, Bobo builds are actually very competitive with magicka DPS. In terms of range DPS in Wrathstone, they're actually outperforming just because of the Spider Silk synergy. That being said, in Elsweyr, because of the cut to the Shadow Silk synergy and the nerf to Lethal Arrow, and as well as the loss from Minor Berserk, it still remains in question whether or not Bobo builds are going to be better than magicka DPS. Right now, the consensus is that even with the nerfs, Bobo builds are still going to be highly competitive with magicka DPS builds. So when I do need to kind of see what I'm able to pull on 6 billion dummies with magicka builds, but I was doing a couple of parses with raid dummies using the Stamina Warden Bobo build, and I found that I was pulling pretty comparable numbers to what I was pulling on my magicka Nightblade, just kind of with Mother's Sorrow. So it does seem like Bobo builds will end up being pretty competitive with magicka DPS, like I mentioned, and they might actually end up out DPSing them, especially when taking into consideration the fact that the Spider Silk synergy is not provided on raid dummies, which will be provided in an actual raid. So now that I have finally set things up together here, the one last thing I do want to show you that I changed was obviously the CPs, because we're not using sharpened anymore. So I just took a couple of points out of Mighty, Thaumaturge, Precise Strikes, and Master at Arms, and just put them into Piercing. So instead of, I believe I was at around 31 in the Wrathstone video, around the low 30s, now I'm at 60 for Piercing. And that's just to make up for using Precise rather than Sharpen on the front bar here. But everything else pretty much remains exactly the same. So infused weapon damage on the Maelstrom bow, we still have the poison damage enchant on the Zogman's bow, and then we have Bloodthirsty through weapon damage, Reliquins, and Velodreths here. I actually need to change, actually no, we're not going to change this. So one of the things that did happen in the Elsweyr patch was the fact that they did end up nerfing the health of Artaeum Takeaway Broth and Dubious Command Throne. So in order to get to a good health level, you will need to run a max health enchant on one of your large pieces. So that's why this health enchant is here instead of that stamina enchant. I am still using Parse Food just so that way I can compare numbers to the Wrathstone build, because I did use Parse Food for the Wrathstone build video, so that's just so I can get a more even comparison. So I'm not actually going to be using Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Command Throne for this Parse here, but I am still sticking with that health enchant because that's what I would actually wear in a raid if I were to do a double bow build with a Nightblade. So I am going to do this Parse here just so you guys can see how the rotation has changed. Not really much has changed, you just dropped Acid Spray. But I did also want to get another data point here, because I do have 2 data points already. I do just want to get a third, just to get a better sense of where things stand. The other thing too is that they changed Relentless Focus to a 30-second duration from a 20-second duration, so it lasts a little bit longer now. So we don't have to recast it quite as often here. You get a couple more bow procs out of it. We're still using it on our back bar though, but we are going to try to cast it on the front bar as much as we can. It's because we do get that additional penetration from Zogman's. So that just helps out our bow proc damage there. Overall, the cast time change to Lethal Arrow doesn't seem to have made that big of an impact. I have not noticed a huge impact on the number of arrows I'm able to cast. Obviously, I can cast more because I did end up gaining a global cooldown back from dropping Lethal Arrow. Acid Spray, I should say. But it doesn't feel, the animation doesn't feel too different, and that makes sense just because it's only a drop of 0.1 of a second, which isn't really all that noticeable. The big question, of course, on everybody's mind was whether the drop in damage was appropriate for the change in cast time, because even though in theory you are casting more of them, that damage reduction does take into effect, and it's a pretty large damage reduction, 25% damage reduction. Alright, so there we go. So we do have our data point now here, the 46.8k. And the previous 2 parses here, this was with Robust. I didn't realize I was not using Bloodthirsty, but it should be approximately equal here. So we had 47.6k, 47.7, and 47.4. So obviously we do need to adjust for the fact that the Parse and Wrathstone did have Minor Berserk compared to right now, because they did take away Minor Berserk from Relentless Focus. So I'm going to do the math off screen real quick. Let me see. I'm going to show you guys the actual mathematics instead. So let me just pop this over here. Change where I'm at so you guys can actually mathematics. So let's see here. So I did one already, and this is kind of the idea here. So you add the Minor Berserk on the left hand side, the numerator, and you drop it from the denominator. Obviously, I have 11% for Mighty, and I have differing CPs for Thaumaturge and Master at Arms, so I just kind of took the average, which was about 18% or so. I know it's not exactly accurate, but it's a good roundabout numbers. So that gives me an actual percentage difference of about 6% or so, and this was one parse here, so let me go back to the other two parses here, and numbers, so 47682, 47682, so 50.5, and I think this is the best parse out of all three of them, so we'll just use this number here. And I believe I was pulling around 53.3k, 53k-ish in the Wrathstone, so this is definitely going to be a DPS drop in general for bow builds. But still, 50.5k is still very respectable. It's still competitive when compared to some other magicka DPS specs, especially when you can take into consideration that stamina builds will be able to use the Shadow Silk synergy to better affect the magicka DPS, because Shadow Silk does scale off of physical penetration. It does scale off of your max stat because it is a synergy, but because it deals poison damage and it scales off of physical penetration, obviously stamina bow builds will take better use of that synergy compared to magicka builds here. So generally speaking, yes, bow builds did end up seeing a DPS drop, but they should still be competitive with or outparse magicka DPS builds in Elsweyr, assuming nothing else changes. They might end up kind of toning back the nerf on lethal arrow a little bit. It really depends, because they also have to balance lethal arrow from a PvP side of things instead of just the PvE side of things. I would probably say that a 20 to 15% nerf to damage would be more fair, at least from a PvE perspective, but again, they also have to take into consideration the fact that lethal arrow is used fairly often in PvP as well. So that is it for this video. Let me know down in the comment section below whether you will continue to use a bow build, or if you're going to swap over to magicka as your ranged spec. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.